Hey, amazing viewers, I love connecting with you all around the world. Stay with me until the end, because what I'm about to share will leave you inspired and ready to take control of your own life. In today's story, you'll hear about an incredible twist that no one saw coming. Also, if this is your first time here, press the subscribe button and join our incredible journey. It was a typical day in the courthouse, and the usual hum of legal proceedings filled the air. But the moment Daniel Brooks stepped into the courtroom, something shifted. He wasn't a lawyer, he wasn't a defendant, and he certainly wasn't someone anyone would look twice at. But today, Daniel was about to change everything. His presence would set into motion a series of events that no one, least of all Judge Veronica Hayes, would ever forget. Judge Hayes was known for one thing above all: her arrogance. She had spent years building a reputation on belittling defendants, mocking those who stood before her, and handing out harsh sentences with a smile. The law was her kingdom, and no one dared challenge her. She was untouchable, or so she thought. As the morning's cases rolled by, the air in the courtroom became tense with each verdict handed down by the powerful judge. She was in top form, throwing insults and sharp words at anyone who dared to ask for mercy. Her words cut like a knife, and the courtroom became a place where fear and dread thrived. No one dared speak out. Then the moment arrived. "Next case," Judge Hayes called, her voice dripping with disdain. The courtroom fell silent, and Daniel stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. This was his moment. He walked toward the front, keeping his steps calm, but every nerve in his body was on high alert. He was about to face the woman who had ruined his life. And now, it was time for her to answer. "Mr. Brooks," Judge Hayes sneered as he reached the front of the courtroom. Her eyes swept over him, and her lips curled into a smirk. "What's your excuse for wasting my time today?" The crowd shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had seen her treat others with disdain, but something about the way she looked at Daniel made the air feel colder. He wasn't just another defendant or witness. He wasn't even a lawyer. He was someone who had come for justice. "I'm not wasting your time, Your Honor," Daniel said calmly, his voice steady despite the tension that was building in the room. "I just need to ask you one question before we begin." Judge Hayes raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "A question? You have one question for me? Fine. Go ahead. Make it quick." Daniel took a deep breath. He had to choose his words carefully. His whole life had led to this moment, and he knew there was no turning back now. He stood tall, locking eyes with Judge Hayes, his voice unwavering. "Do you believe in justice, Your Honor?" The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. The courtroom went deathly quiet. Even Judge Hayes seemed taken aback. For a split second, the smirk on her face faltered. She blinked. Did he just ask her if she believed in justice? Wasn't she the one who handed it out, wielding her gavel like a sword? "I am justice," she sneered, her voice dripping with arrogance. "I don't need to answer your question, Mr. Brooks. You're wasting my time." But Daniel wasn't done. He wasn't afraid. He had already known what was coming. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He didn't speak for a moment, letting the tension build as the room waited for him to make his move. Then he placed the paper on the desk in front of the judge. Her eyes flickered to the paper, and something in her expression shifted. It was almost imperceptible, but Daniel saw it. Her smirk disappeared for a brief moment, replaced by a flicker of recognition. Panic, fear. It was hard to tell, but in that second, Daniel knew something had changed. Judge Hayes took the paper, her fingers trembling slightly. "What is this?" she muttered, her voice no longer as confident as before. Daniel remained silent. He watched her closely as she unfolded the paper, her eyes scanning it quickly. She paled, her grip tightening on the paper. The room seemed to freeze as her expression shifted from disbelief to something far darker. The courtroom gasped. It wasn't just the words on the paper that had stunned everyone. It was what was happening next. Suddenly, The doors of the courtroom swung open, and in walked a group of men in dark suits, their presence commanding attention. They moved with purpose, exuding power and authority. Judge Hayes looked up at them, her eyes wide, and for the first time, she seemed unsure of herself. One of the men stepped forward and pulled out a badge, a golden badge that gleamed under the courtroom lights. The moment it appeared, the atmosphere in the room changed completely. There was no mistaking the weight of the badge. It wasn't just any badge. It was a symbol of authority. The man stepped closer to Judge Hayes, his voice calm but firm. "Judge Hayes," he said, his tone cold, "you are under arrest." The room erupted in chaos. Gasps filled the air as people jumped to their feet in disbelief. A judge, one of the most powerful people in that building, was being arrested, and it was happening in front of everyone. Judge Hayes shook her head, her lips trembling. "This is a mistake," she stammered. "You can't do this. I'm a sitting judge." But it was happening. There was no stopping it now. The guards at the sides of the room hesitated, exchanging looks. Should they intervene? Should they stop this? But they too could see what was happening. The quiet man, Daniel Brooks, had just done what no one else had dared. He was taking down the untouchable judge who had destroyed countless lives with her abuse of power. "You don't understand," Judge Hayes pleaded. "You don't know who I am." "I know exactly who you are," Daniel replied quietly. "And now, it's time for justice." He stepped back, his gaze never leaving hers as the agents began to move in. But before they could proceed any further, Daniel reached into his pocket once more. This time, he pulled out a golden badge of his own, one that caught the light and sent a chill down everyone's spine. "You see, Your Honor," Daniel continued, his voice steady and full of authority, "I am the one who brought you here." The courtroom fell silent again, the weight of his words sinking in. The badge he held was not just a symbol of authority. It was the proof that Judge Hayes had underestimated him. She had mocked him, belittled him, and now it was time for her to face the consequences. Judge Hayes' face drained of color as she realized the full extent of her mistake. The power that she had wielded so carelessly was now slipping through her fingers. This wasn't just a courtroom drama. This was real life, and in that moment, everything she had built began to unravel. As the agents closed in, Daniel stood tall. He had spent years building a case, gathering the evidence, waiting for this very moment. And now, it was time to see it through. This wasn't just about taking down a corrupt judge. This was about something bigger. This was about justice, true justice. The powerful, untouchable judge had finally met her match. The courtroom was still in chaos. Judge Hayes was being led out by federal agents, her expression a mix of disbelief and mounting fear. The gasps and murmurs from the audience filled the air as people struggled to comprehend what had just unfolded. But amidst the frenzy, Daniel Brooks remained calm. He wasn't a man who sought the spotlight or craved attention. His purpose was clear: to right the wrongs that had been done to him and countless others. Daniel turned away from the scene, his expression unreadable. He had accomplished what he came here to do, but this was only the beginning. He knew it wasn't over. As the federal agents escorted Hayes out, Daniel's mind was already working, piecing together the next steps of his plan. He had waited too long for this. He couldn't afford to let his guard down now. As the door to the courtroom slammed shut behind him, he felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Agent Carter standing there, his face a mixture of confusion and admiration. "You did it," Carter said, his voice low, almost in disbelief. Daniel nodded but didn't speak. His eyes scanned the room, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible sigh of relief. But he knew better than anyone. Victory was fleeting. This battle might have been won, but the war was far from over. "Do you think we've got her?" Carter asked, his voice tense. "No," Daniel replied firmly, his gaze narrowing. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." Carter raised an eyebrow. "What are you talking about?" Daniel turned to face him. Judge Hayes is just one piece of the puzzle. We're playing right into her hands if we think she's done for. This, all of this, he gestured to the courtroom behind them, was part of her plan. Agent Carter blinked, not fully understanding. You're saying this was all a setup? Daniel didn't answer immediately. He wasn't about to reveal all the cards he had left. Instead, he gave a slight nod and turned away. Come on. We've got work to do. The agents who had been accompanying them began moving toward the exits, their faces grim as they processed what had just happened. Some looked at Daniel with admiration, while others seemed uneasy, unsure of how to proceed now that their boss, the powerful, untouchable judge, was in custody. As Daniel walked briskly down the corridor, he thought back to the moment when he had first set foot in the courthouse, just that morning. He had been nothing more than a man with a purpose, a man who had lost everything to the system that Judge Hayes controlled. The same system that had swallowed him whole, destroyed his career, and left him a shell of the man he once was. But now things had changed. He wasn't the same Daniel Brooks who had walked into that courthouse. The fire that had once been extinguished in him was burning bright again. He had been silent for far too long, but now the truth would be heard. And Judge Hayes would face the consequences of her actions. As Daniel stepped into the elevator, he pressed the button for the underground parking garage. He could feel Carter's eyes on him, but he didn't turn. His mind was elsewhere, locked in a battle of strategy and planning. His next move had to be calculated. He had spent years gathering evidence, tracking every illegal transaction, every crooked deal. But it wasn't enough to bring Hayes down. Not yet. It would take more than just exposing her corruption. It would take her entire network. The elevator doors slid open with a soft ping, and Daniel stepped into the dimly lit garage. He made his way to his car, the sound of his footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. As he reached for the door handle, Carter caught up to him. "Where are you going?" Carter asked. "Back to the beginning," Daniel replied without hesitation. Carter looked confused for a moment, but then his face shifted as the realization hit him. "You're going after the people behind her." Daniel's eyes met his. "Exactly. If Hayes is going to fall, we need to take down everyone who's been covering her tracks. And that means we have to go deeper. We need to find the people who helped her, the ones who think they're untouchable. They're out there, and we know who they are. I just need to get to them before she does." Carter paused, taking a moment to absorb the weight of what Daniel was saying. "So, what's the plan?" "Simple," Daniel said, his voice steady. "We hit them where it hurts. We take everything they've been hiding. Their secrets, their connections, their money. Once we have that, there's no way they can run. And Hayes, she won't have anyone left to protect her." Carter nodded slowly, a look of determination creeping across his face. "You really think we can bring them down? I mean, these people are powerful." Daniel didn't answer right away. Instead, he opened the door to his car and slid into the driver's seat. "I don't think we can." "I know we can." The next few days were a blur. Daniel had never been so focused. Every minute, every second mattered. He and Carter worked tirelessly, following leads, talking to contacts, and digging deeper into the network of people who had kept Hayes in power. It wasn't just a matter of exposing corruption anymore. It was about dismantling an entire system, one piece at a time. Daniel knew the risks. He had always known them. But this wasn't just about revenge. It was about redemption. It was about showing the world that no one, no matter how powerful, was above the law. And the stakes had never been higher. But as the days wore on, the walls seemed to close in. The more Daniel uncovered, the more dangerous things became. Someone was watching them. Someone knew they were getting close. It wasn't long before the threats started. Anonymous phone calls, suspicious cars parked outside his apartment. But Daniel didn't flinch. He had seen worse. He had been through worse. And nothing was going to stop him now. One night, after a long day of chasing leads, Daniel sat in his office, reviewing documents when his phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID. Unknown. He answered. Brooks. A voice on the other end was low and deliberate. You're getting too close, Daniel. You're playing a dangerous game. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He knew that voice. It was someone from Hayes' inner circle. Who is this? Daniel asked, his tone cold. The voice chuckled, but it wasn't a friendly laugh. You'll find out soon enough. But just know, the people you're after, they won't go down without a fight. And neither will she. The line went dead. Daniel slammed the phone down, his fists clenched. He wasn't afraid. In fact, the warning had only strengthened his resolve. He had been underestimated, overlooked. But now, everything was falling into place. He had one goal now, to expose the entire network, to show the world that justice, no matter how long it took, would always find a way. And no one, not even someone as powerful as Veronica Hayes, would escape its reach. It was time to bring the fight to her. As Daniel stepped into his car again, his mind raced with possibilities. The final phase of his plan was about to begin. But he knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be more obstacles, more dangers. And perhaps there would be moments when he would feel like he was losing ground. But as long as he could draw breath, he would never stop fighting. For justice, for those who had been silenced, for the truth. And nothing, not even the most powerful people in the world, could take that away. The day had finally come. The pieces were in place, and Daniel knew that this would be the moment that changed everything. The final chapter of his long journey, one that had taken him from the depths of despair to the edge of justice, was about to unfold. Daniel sat in the back of his car, his gaze fixed on the darkened city streets. The glow of the streetlights blurred past as he thought about everything he had endured. The corruption, the lies, the system that had failed him, the very system he had once served. He had been betrayed by the very people he had trusted, his life destroyed by those who believed they were untouchable. But through it all, he had never lost sight of his mission. The truth mattered. Justice mattered. Even if it seemed impossible, even when the odds were stacked against him, Daniel had refused to give up. He had stood his ground. He had kept his faith in the one thing that could never be taken away. The unwavering belief that what was right would always find a way. And now, standing on the precipice of the final battle, he knew that victory was no longer just a distant dream. It was within his grasp. The car came to a slow stop in front of an old, run-down building on the outskirts of the city. This was it, the heart of the network. The place where the darkness had taken root. It was time to end it. Daniel stepped out, his feet hitting the pavement with purpose. He walked toward the entrance, his mind sharp, his heart steady. He had nothing to lose anymore. Everything he had once held dear had been taken from him. But in return, he had gained something far more powerful: the courage to face down the monsters that hid behind masks of power. As he entered the building, he was greeted by silence. It was an eerie, oppressive silence, broken only by the sound of his footsteps echoing off the walls. He knew they were here, those who had conspired with Judge Hayes, those who thought they were above the law. They were waiting, watching, but they didn't know that he had already won. They had no idea what was coming. Daniel moved quickly, his eyes scanning the room. He could feel the weight of the past few weeks, the toll it had taken on him. Every sleepless night, every painstaking moment of research, every ounce of energy he had poured into this mission had led him here. But it wasn't about the past anymore. It wasn't about the people who had tried to crush him. It was about what was right. It was about the people who couldn't fight for themselves. And then he saw them. The faces of the men and women who had kept Veronica Hayes safe. They were sitting around a large table, their eyes cold, calculating. For a moment, they didn't notice him. And then, as if on cue, they all turned their heads. A smile spread across one man's face. But it wasn't friendly. It was a look of disdain, as if he believed Daniel was just another pawn in their game. Daniel Brooks, the man said, his voice dripping with contempt. "We were wondering when you'd show up." Daniel's eyes locked on the man, his voice low but steady. "I'm not here to talk." The room went silent, and Daniel took a step forward. The man at the table stood, his posture stiff, but there was something in his eyes now. Fear. It was brief, but it was there. They had underestimated him. They had thought he was just another victim. But he wasn't. He wasn't some pawn to be sacrificed. He had survived. And now, it was their turn to face the consequences of their actions. "I don't need to explain myself," Daniel continued, his voice steady. "But I will tell you one thing. Everything you've done, every deal, every lie, every person you've destroyed, ends today." For a long moment, no one moved. The tension in the room was palpable. But Daniel didn't back down. He had fought too long, and too hard to be intimidated now. "Do you really think you can take us all down?" One of the men sneered. Daniel didn't flinch. "Yes, because you've forgotten one thing. There is always someone watching. There's always someone who won't let the truth die. And no matter how powerful you think you are, the truth will always come out." The man's smirk faltered. He looked around the room, as if searching for a way out. But there was no escape. The truth had already found its way here. And now, there was nowhere for them to hide. Suddenly, the sound of sirens blared outside, and the building was flooded with light. Federal agents poured in, their guns drawn. Daniel didn't move, his gaze never leaving the group of conspirators. He had already won. They were surrounded. It was over. The closing message. As the agents moved in to arrest the men and women who had been part of Hayes' corrupt network, Daniel stood still. He didn't feel victorious. He didn't feel triumphant. Instead, he felt something deeper, a sense of peace. The long, brutal journey had come to an end, but what mattered more than the outcome was the truth that had led him here. The unwavering belief that no matter how dark the world seemed, no matter how powerful the forces of corruption, truth and justice had a way of prevailing. In the end, it wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making those who had wronged him suffer. It was about something much more profound. The idea that justice is not a fleeting concept, something that can be bent or ignored. It is an enduring force, an unbreakable law that guides those who have the courage to stand up for what is right. Daniel had been knocked down more times than he could count. He had lost everything, but he had never lost his faith in justice. And in that belief, he had found the strength to face down the most powerful enemies. And that, in the end, was what had made all the difference. To anyone watching, to anyone who feels powerless, to anyone who has been beaten down by the world, remember this: you are never truly defeated. As long as you stand firm in your beliefs, as long as you fight for what is right, you will find your way. The road may be long. It may be painful. But justice is always worth the fight. And no matter how many times you are knocked down, always remember, there is always a way back. Justice will always find a way. Daniel Brooks had proven that. And so can you.